As somebody who has the original P07 Tactical, I wanted to find out a few key things. Number one, is it actually worth upgrading to the P09 Nocturne, or should you keep your P07? Number two, what's the biggest differences between the two? You'll actually notice some of the biggest differences between the P07 and the P09 when you're unboxing it. In the box, you're gonna get 2 additional back straps, so you have a total of 3 so that you can adjust the grip to the size of your hands. You'll get 2 15 rounders for mags. You'll get a couple of little dummy rounds, and you'll get the safety decocker conversion so you can switch it from decocker to safety if you want to. Aside from that and a couple of locks, there's really nothing else in the box with this guy. Something that kind of surprised me about that was when I originally picked up the CZ P07 years ago, when I unboxed this one, it actually included the +2 base plates for the magazines. So as I did a little bit more research on why the P09 doesn't have it, a lot of people said only the tactical versions of the P07 and P09 had those extensions. However, with that said, there is currently 4 models of the P09 available. You have the P09C, which is the one that we have. Then they have the P09F, which is the full-size variant. And then both of those models both have what they call the SR model, otherwise known as the suppressor ready, which is just a different name that means the same thing as like the P07 Tactical from years ago. However, when you look at the SR versions of both the compact and the full size, only the full size comes with extended base plates for the magazines. The compact doesn't, which means if you want extensions, you gotta resort to the aftermarket, which is what I've done right here. But don't worry, I'll have a list for everything that we're talking about in today's video. It'll be the first link in the description. I'll pin it down in the comments section. And so if you're new to the CZ world, the best way that I've learned to think about the CZ P07, or in this case, the P09C, is it's essentially a double action, single action variant that's very similar to that of the Glock 19. If you look at it up close, the slide and barrel are a little bit shorter, coming in at about 3.74 inches, whereas a Glock 19 slide and barrel comes in at about 4 inches. However, the grip on this one is a little bit larger, especially along the back strap. And when you have a magazine inserted, it makes it a little bit longer than the stock Glock. And that's gonna bring us to what type of things did they upgrade on the P09 versus the original P07 and the original P09. In order for that to make sense, I gotta tell you everything that I hated about my original P07. When I first bought this back in 2018, don't pay attention to the upgrades that are on it. We'll talk a little bit more about those later. But I got it in its completely stock configuration with the threaded barrel and the suppressor height sights. The first thing I noticed before I ever took it to the range was I did not like the grip texture. Let me put it like this. I love the grip texture where it was, but they didn't have enough of it, and they didn't have it in the right places. The biggest place that bothered me the most was right here. This is where you put the heel of your support hand when you're gripping it. I also didn't like that they didn't have a lot of texture along the front strap on the corners of both sides. There was a lot of bald areas that were very, very slippery. The second thing that I didn't like about this is if you look at the slides, if you compare the slide of a P07 or the new P09s and compare them to a slide of almost any other gun, whether it be a Glock or even the CZ P09C, you'll notice that the slide has very little surface area for you to actually grip it to rack it. And that's because they decided to do internal slide rails very similar to that of the CZ P01 as well as some of their Shadow 2 models. The reasoning behind this is theoretically it lowers the center of mass and therefore lowers some of the felt recoil. However, the downside to that is unless you have an optic on your gun or really aggressive serrations, it's very difficult to actually rack the slide in a hurry. The third thing that I didn't like about the original P07 or P09 was the lack of optics mounting capabilities. I actually had to send my slide off to get it milled so that I could add an optic, and I had a bunch of other stuff done to the slide as well. But aside from the windows that were cut into this slide, the serrations that are on the front and the serrations that are on the rear are exactly the same as they came from the factory. And it cost me almost as much money to get this stuff done to the slide as I actually paid for the pistol. Kind of crazy, right? But the hammer in the coffin for me when it came to the CZ P07, at least in my experience, because we're gonna go into a little bit of detail about this because I think it's something that you need to know, was the trigger pull. Whenever I'm getting a double action, single action gun, I like to judge the gun based on the double action pull. I want to know how hard it is to pull. I want to know if there's any stacking when you pull. I want to see how gritty it is. And that's going to tell me almost everything I need to know about a double action, single action gun, at least as of today. But back when I got my original P07, this was my very first double action, single action gun. So I didn't know what I was actually looking at. And so when I sent out my gun to have the slide lightened and do the optic cut on it, I had all the Cajun Gun Works internals and spring kits installed into this gun. And yes, it worked really well at lightening the trigger. When I first got this, the original double action pull on here was 11 pounds. That is absolutely insane. And I think the single action pull was between 4 and 5 pounds, but the single action didn't bother me as much. But the biggest thing that was bothering me wasn't just the weight. This trigger is very, very gritty. But once I got the Cajun Gun Works trigger installed, it drastically reduced the weight. As of today, the double action pull comes in at less than 6 pounds and the single action pull comes at a hair over 2 pounds. However, this trigger is still incredibly gritty, and I have thousands of rounds through this. I have taken this gun apart numerous times and polished all of the mating surfaces in the trigger. I can't find anywhere where this trigger is gritty. But watch this. When I actually pull the trigger in the double action mode, you can see my finger kind of stuttering like this as I'm pulling it back. And that's with everything completely upgraded in it. I'm telling you this because as of today, with my example of the P09C, this trigger is far better than this one ever was. Yeah, this one's lighter now, but just watch the difference in the smoothness. This trigger also comes in at about 2 pounds lighter on the double action pull than that one did when I originally got it. This one comes in at about 9 pounds on the double action pull, and it comes in between 3 pounds and 5 ounces and 3 pounds and 9 ounces on the single action pull. But the biggest thing is this trigger is much smoother. I wanted to bring this up because from my research that I've done across various Facebook groups and in different Reddit groups and stuff like that, everyone seems to have a different experience when it comes to the new Nocturnes and when it comes to the original P07. There's people that have the original P07 and they said that their trigger was far smoother than the new one. So I'm wondering, is this like a quality control type deal? Is CZ not putting out consistent triggers in these guns? I don't know. Let me know your thoughts down in the comments because I'd really like to get to the bottom of this. Technically speaking, the trigger that's in the new P09C is technically no different than the original P07. Maybe it is a little bit inconsistent on which trigger you get, but they did a ton of upgrades to this guy that you really need to see. Upgrade number one that they did to this was they gave it way better slide serrations, especially on the front. Not only did they add some serrations to the top of the gun, and thicker serrations on the side, they also beefened up the flat spot on the top of the slide versus the original version. And what I've noticed is, even if your hammer is completely down, when you want to go press check this, there is no problems at all doing the press check. It makes it a lot easier. However, on the original one, if you look at my hands want to slide before it will even come back. And that's with some fairly aggressive texturing on the original, but I will say these new serrations absolutely work way better. The next upgrade that they did on the P09 versus the P07 is the sights. These are the exact same sights that you see on the newer P10Cs and the ported P10C. They're serrated to reduce glare. They are not night sights, but they do use photoluminescent paint on them, so if you charge them up with light, they'll glow in the dark, if that's something you're into. In addition to that, they've also changed the way that these sights mount. You can see on the original slide, CZ's always had this weird like front push-in dovetail type deal for their sights. And now they've used a standard dovetail for the front sight to make it easier for people to swap them out if they want to. Obviously, these are now optics ready from the factory. These work with the Shield Sights RMS footprint or the Holosun K footprint. And that's fine for me because if you watched my most recent video about my favorite enclosed pistol red dots, Holosun EPS and EPS Carry were my favorites on the list. And I threw the EPS Carry on here, and if you look at it up close, you can see that this thing fits perfectly and it fits very flush. In addition to that, you'll also notice that you get a perfect co-witness with this. And I think that's something that's really good because these sights aren't really suppressor height sights, but they're able to cut the optics footprint down so much that you can co-witness with standard height sights. With that said, I don't understand why they chose not to go modular optics like they did with the CZ P09C. Because if you look at this up close, you can see there's almost a 1/4 inch of a gap from the rear of the red dot to the front of the dovetail. They could have made that a little bit larger and actually made this modular optics if they wanted to. Doesn't bother me that much, but I think that was a missed opportunity on their hand. Aside from that, the other biggest upgrade that they did to this was the grip texturing. They fixed absolutely everything that I hated about the grip texturing on the original P07 and P09. If you compare the back straps, you could tell the back strap has way more aggressive texturing now. If you look at the sides sides almost look very similar, but they finally added texturing at the top where the heel of your hand goes. And then where the indexing points are, it's a little bit smaller, but it's still just as effective. But then they also added a ton of texture to the front strap, especially in those corners where my fingers would tend to slip right here. And so whenever I get a gun and I'm testing out the grip texture of it, at least nowadays, I always press out, I move my grip hand, and I try to break it against my support hand. And you can see I am squeezing very hard, and I can still make this gun slide. With this new one, because they added the texture where your heel of your hand goes, when I go to break it, I can't make it slide. And that is a huge benefit when it comes to mitigating recoil and getting fast and accurate follow-up shots, which you'll see when we get to the range footage. Now, the next changes, I don't know if I'm a big fan of or not. Time will tell. They added this stupid lanyard loop to the bottom of the back strap right here, and it's not easy to remove. The only way to remove it is to get a new grip plug, and you can't remove this without actually replacing it because that's where your mainspring housing is, and that's essentially the cup that holds the spring. So the only way to really remove it is you can get a mag well, which I'll have some info on over at the list if you want to check that out. Mag wells will delete that. Number two, I believe you could pick up the original P07 plug to put in there, and that'll delete that as well. But fortunately, at least with this one, with these mag extensions that I'll have some info on this list, it fits no problem with the lanyard loop in there. The next problem does have to do with the magazines. Similar to that of the CZ P09Cs, they have changed the magazines. They look a little bit different, and they're not backwards compatible. However, the original magazines that were on the P07 will carry forward to the new P09s, no problem. So I can take the extended mags that came with my original one and they will fit. But you'll notice there's a little gap right here. And that's kind of a little bit of a controversial claim. Their newer magazines have this little grip on there, a little texturing, and it's cut upwards. And so when you insert the mag, it takes up that space. That's a little bit bothersome because, you know, when you do throw in an extension on your mag, put it in there, that little hollow space is there. It's kind of weird. I don't know. You let me know what you think down in the comments. So what about the reliability of the P09? Is it reliable? How does it shoot? Well, there are two things that you're gonna have to probably replace over time in any CZ P07 or the new P09s, and that's gonna be your trigger return spring. That's considered a consumable item, and they will have to be replaced approximately every 8,000 rounds, give or take. The other thing though, is I've heard, and I haven't actually had to replace one yet, is your slide stop slide release right here is also a consumable item and will have to be replaced every like 8 to 10,000 rounds. I don't know for sure if that's actually the case, but a lot of people have said it, and so I'm gonna say it, but put out a word of caution that I don't know if that's true or not. Now, when it comes to the P09 in general, when these released, some people had a ton of problems with these, and some people had a phenomenal result with them. Honest Outlaw Chris, good friend of mine, he is a huge advocate of the original P07. It's one of his all-time favorite handguns. And so when he got the P09C, he was very excited for it. However, in his video, they had nothing but problems. Failures to feed, failures to fire, all kinds of crazy stuff. Now, that could be because the gun was new and it just wasn't perfect when they sent it out. That's happened with many manufacturers before. Some people said that the optic screw on this side where this extractor is was too long. And that is a real thing. It doesn't matter what gun you have. If the optic screw hole is over the extractor right here, if it's too long, it will cause a ton of malfunctions. I've had it happen with a lot of different brand guns. However, he made a second video on his wife's channel and they took the optic off and they were still having the same problems. And then I think after they got 500 or 600 rounds through it, it finally started being reliable. A couple other guys I spoke with on Reddit and a couple other guys on Facebook, some people claimed when they put certain lights on here that it would cause the gun to malfunction. But when they took the light off and put a different light on, the gun wouldn't malfunction anymore. This is just other people's experience. Let's talk about mine. So as of right now, I only have about 200 rounds through this right now. This is just a first impressions, not a complete review. I went to the range with this about a month or so ago, and it was my first time going back to the range since summer started. And I'll be honest, don't ever take a break of that length away from shooting, especially handguns. You get incredibly rusty. You almost feel like you can't shoot anymore. Don't recommend it. But I went back to the range and I went to shoot this. And during my experience, this thing ran perfect. From round number 1 all the way to round 200, not a single flaw in this. But I will say this, I did notice a couple of things about it that were different from my original P07. Number 1, the iron sights. The iron sights, as I mentioned, they give you a perfect co-witness, especially with the Holosun EPS. Now, they're not quite suppressor height sights, but I did find myself, when I was shooting, I noticed that I had to aim much higher than I'm used to aiming in order to hit center of mass. And so, for example, I was about 40 to 45 feet away from my still silhouette target, and I found myself having to aim at the top of the head to hit at the chest. Thought that was kind of odd. I have not shot it with the red dot on it because we're gonna do more videos on this in the future, but that was something that I thought was very odd about it. However, it shot far better and far easier to me in my hands than it did on the original P07. I think it had to do with the better grip texture, and the trigger, at least in mine that I have, was much smoother. And that's gonna bring us to aftermarket upgrades. Are there any for the P09? Well, from the research that I've done, all of the same upgrades that you could get for the original P07s and the original P09s will also work on the new P09 Nocturnes. So that's a good thing. There's magwells, there's triggers, there's all kinds of stuff you can get for these. Like I said, I'll have more info about all that over this list if you wanna check that out. And so, like I mentioned, we're gonna do a ton of more videos on this in the future because we're gonna upgrade some stuff on it. But that brings me to my next question. Would I buy this knowing what I know now? And the answer to that question is yes, I would buy this with my own money, knowing what I know now. And I wish I would have had this one instead of this one, and I would not buy this one again, knowing what I know now. Maybe I just got a bad one. I don't know, but I would love to hear what you guys think about that, because it seems that everyone argues about what their experience is with this one and this one. Now, if you are curious about what my favorite enclosed red dots are as of right now, go check out this video right here. But until next time, guys, I love you, and you guys stay sexy.